Zoom meeting, then it will simultaneously bring you into one meeting and exit you from another one. So you exited, you eliminated the post-meeting one you had exited from. So I've been there before. I want you to know.
We are, by the way, live on Access Humboldt.
All right.
Excellent. I think we're still waiting for Sophia and
I'm here.
Oh, Sophia, you're here. Excellent. And is Leslie here?
Not yet.
Sometimes getting out of this full screen mode is, but usually.
We don't have Leslie yet.
We got a quorum?
We have a quorum. Our chair is, I think, still kind of resolving some of his technical issues. So,
I see you now. I think that's straight up.
okay. So if you're ready to convene the meeting, we can do that.
All right, I call this meeting of the HWMA board of February the 11th into order. Would we please have roll call?
Smith? He's muted currently, but I think I see him saying he's here. And I see him here as well. Bone.
He's here, yeah. All of the above. You can all relax.
Pereira.
Here.
Castellano.
Here.
Hogan.
Here.
And Wilson.
Here. All right, we have a quorum, and we're the next item is a consent calendar. And that is all matters listed under consent calendar are considered to be routine by the HWMA board and will be enacted upon by one motion unless a specific request for review is made by a board member or a member of the public. The consent calendar will not be read. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless pulled for discussion. Any member of the board have an item they would like to pull for discussion? And how about the public who I don't see, somebody else has to be looking at that. I don't see anybody.
Frank, I see no hands up. And as far as I'm aware, we don't have any other comments.
All right, then I will close comment on consent calendar, and I will entertain a motion to accept the consent calendar.
I will move to approve the consent calendar.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Do we have a motion with a second? Have a roll call vote, please.
Smith.
Aye.
Bone.
Yep.
Pereira.
Aye.
Castellano.
Aye.
Hogan.
Aye.
Wilson.
Aye. Motion passes. Next item is oral communication. This is for this time is provided for people to address the board or to submit written communications concerning matters not on the agenda. Board members may respond. I have a hard time with some of this reading still. May respond to statements, but may request that requests that require board action will be allocated for this item. And the time permitted for each and the time permitted for each individual speaker. Such time allocations or portions thereof shall not be transferred to other speakers. Do we have any public comment?
Mr. Chair, I do want to note that for the oral and written communication, that a report was provided by Maggie Gaynor with Zero Waste Humboldt. She is on the line, so she might want to address this specifically. The letter or the information that she sent to all of us was forwarded to you earlier. It was from the Container Recycling Institute, and that was embedded in an email that had a few other pieces of correspondence. So board members do have that. I would just ask if Maggie would like to add anything additional, or anybody else who would like to address the board. I think Linda has an introduction to make as well.
Additionally, I do have one hand up, so let me know when you're ready for that.
Okay, did Maggie wish to respond verbally?
Yes, is this a good time?
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you, Frank. Thank you, Jill. Three informational items, the most important being the letter that was sent in advance. We hope that you'll really read it seriously and consider it. And it really is emphasizing what I think you all know, the importance of SB 1383. 6 local organizations, environmental and climate change focused, have been starting to meet. I want you to know that we're here, available, wanting to work with local government and to assist and be helpful. And we've been doing a lot of research about what's going on in other states, what might work in our rural region. And most importantly, as you all have your important decisions moving forward, to replace Jill in her retirement, in addition to someone who is skilled and experienced in government relations, we really wanted to emphasize someone who could work in this important area. It's such a large portion of the waste stream, and food and organics. And it has such a significant impact on global warming. So all the information is right there, and I hope that we can engage with you about that. Second one is just that wanted you to skim that CRI report. It's an analysis that compares the 4 types of CalRecycle payments on a dollar per ton basis. And it quantifies the total revenues and estimated costs of curbside and drop-off recycling. It's a little dense. All of that is to say, I look at it and I think it started in 1987. That's like 35 years ago. It really is time for several of California's mandated types of recycling programs to get a serious evaluation and upgrade and update. We've learned a lot since we started. My third informational thing is we will be hiring at Zero Waste Humboldt this spring. And I thought this is a good place to just to bring this information. If you know of folks who really are interested in waste reduction and this cause, to please send them our way. And we'll be able to get the job description and all the relevant information to them. It won't be till spring. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you.
Frank, through the chair.
Yes.
Maggie, you said you've been contacting other states on the organic waste emissions.
Yes.
What other states did you contact, and what are they doing?
Well, the ones that I can off the top of my head mention are early on organized by the Northeast Recycling Council. So we're talking about Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, that area, Colorado. Gosh, there's a number, and these are in particular related to carbon farming, working with farmers in rural regions.
Understood, but are they doing it, or did they just talk about it? You made it sound like they were doing it.
They're doing it. They're doing it. And so we're trying to learn everything we can that we could apply to Humboldt. And again, there's more than just one way to, handle the problem. I thought I would also mention that, right off the top of my head. Well, anyway, we'll be compiling that. Cal Recycle has actually asked that we send them our summary of what's going on. It's not been easy for our work, as you all know, and I'm sure Jill's looked into this. It's not easy to always comply with state regulations in rural areas. It's just not set up for rural areas. And so it's kind of like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing in state regulatory, in developing regulations. We're learning from some of the other states and rural regions about how they're doing it.
All right. You said you had, Tyler, you had another hand raised?
Yeah, this is Wendy Ring. If you'd like to introduce yourself and say your thing, go for it.
Great. Hi. Thanks for the opportunity. I really just wanted to do a little bit more cheerleading on figuring out how we can recycle our organic waste here in Humboldt County. And there's a number of benefits that you may not have thought of. We're paying about $700,000 every year for the hauling and tip fees for stuff that could be composted here. We are contributing to greenhouse gas emissions because even though the landfill that we use captures greenhouse gas, it doesn't do that until we're done putting all of the stuff in and cap it. And most of the greenhouse gas emissions come out before that. We also have a tremendous opportunity to improve our soil fertility and productivity of our farm and rangelands, and for our local ranchers and farmers to get money, which the state is now paying farmers and ranchers to apply compost to their land because it is such a good a way of sequestering carbon. So, you know, we would really like to see this paradigm shift happen, not just because SB 1383 says we have to, but because it's really good for Humboldt County. So, you know, let's go from get this garbage out of here to how do we make the most of this valuable resource? And I'm a person who has been actually doing the research and looking at other states because we're hoping that we can develop a way that local farmers and ranchers and dairies can do some of that composting. And I'd be happy, Rex, to send you a list of all of the states. It is considerable that have come up with special categories for farmers to compost on their land.
Well, through the chair, I appreciate, I'd like to see that because I'd love to see, you mentioned dairies, which is going to be the prevalent, you know, and a lot of ranching, and you can be really limited. I know the problem with doing organics is one thing is certifying them 100% organic. And we're going to run into an issue since all the dairies, except for one in Humboldt County, are now organic. And the standards are pretty high. So, I mean, when you there's a lot of waste that goes in, there's a lot of organic waste that goes into that stream that is not certified organic and could tip the scale the other way. And that's a tough hoe to row. So.
This is probably, I have a question that might go to Director Bone, but it might be best left for this after this presentation on
SB 1383.
1333. I might fit better in there. So I'll defer that until that time. Do we have, is that the last of our public comment?
Next would be Linda Wise from Recology.
Okay.
Why, thank you, Tyler. Hey, thank you for having me tonight. And I wanted to let you all know that we have a new face in your shared screen, Frank Nelson. He is our new operations manager for Recology Humboldt County. And he's been here for a month, and it seems like it slipped by very quickly. It feels like it was just yesterday. He's learning out all the complexities of all the varied operations that we have up here in Humboldt County. I don't know if a lot of you guys are aware is that we have, you know, up here it's kind of unique with the Recology operations is that we've got bite sizes of probably about every part of the waste industry here. And Frank is taking it all in, except for organic composting, organics composting and landfilling up here. But he's got every little pieces of that, and he's getting to know your areas. And so you'll be seeing him and his face around. So welcome, Frank.
Welcome. Okay, thank you, Linda. Any other public comment?
Yes, one more. Martha, if you could introduce yourself, and then you have the floor.
Well, I just wanted to clarify, is this the best time to make a general comment about organic waste, or should I wait until after Director Duffy's presentation?
If your comment is going to be more specific to SB 1383, it would be appropriate to be heard after the presentation. If your comments on non-agenda items, go ahead and bring it in.
Well, okay, well, I guess since I have the floor, I'll go ahead. My name's Martha Walden, and I want to congratulate Director Duffy on her upcoming retirement. I know she's done a tremendous job heading up a really, complex organization. I found a phrase in the HWMA 2018 strategic plan update that I really liked. I think it expresses really well, and it's really relevant to organic waste. It refers to the next evolutionary phase of waste management in California, an approach that makes current landfill diversion programs equal partners with materials management to achieve the highest and best use of all materials in California. I just think that puts it really well, and is relevant to organic waste, which can be converted from something we have to pay to bury in a big hole to a valuable soil amendment that can help us grow food without toxic synthetic fertilizers that have been causing a lot of problems for the environment. And it can help us sequester carbon in the soil too. And there's also the possibility of converting organic waste into energy as well. So these are really exciting possibilities. And I hope you will find someone to fill Director Duffy's shoes who is just as excited as I am, but more knowledgeable about how to accomplish these goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Tyler, do we have any?
That is all I have for people with hands raised.
All right, then I will close public comment and move on to item 3. No, I'm sorry, item 4, receive presentation on SB 1383, short-lived climate change pollution, organisms, organics diversion and treatment processing. Is that Director Duffy? Are you presenting that?
Jill, you are currently muted.
Jill is muted.
Yeah, she's working.
I'm trying to open up multiple files at the same time. My apologies. So hold on one moment. And Frank, that is correct. I am going to be giving the presentation to the board. And I am now trying to work on getting the screen so that we can share it. So Kyler, you've got me set up. Thank you. Can you see my screen? Can folks see my screen?
Yes,
we
we
sure
can,
can.
Jill.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Let's see here. Here we go. Let me just do a couple more things so I can move things around, because when you open things up, Zoom wants to reconfigure everybody. And I think I'm just going to have to deal with it. So good evening. SB 1383 was authored by Senate member Lara, in 2016, and the legislation was signed by Governor Brown in September of 2016. And the purpose of the legislation was to address short-lived climate pollutants with the goal of reducing specific pollutants. Now, I do want to go ahead and just gently warn members, this is a pretty complex piece of legislation with a lot of moving parts. So I've tried my best to prepare a very high level presentation, and I am using some information that was provided by the CalRecycle itself. But before I get there, I want to do a quick primer for our new board members, as well as interested members of the public. The California Constitution grants powers to cities and counties to make and enforce local police, sanitary, and other ordinances. And this allows jurisdictions to set ordinances and enter into agreements for the provision of waste hauling services. The California Public Resource Code sets forth that cities and counties have the authority to regulate the handling of solid waste within their jurisdiction, to implement state regulations, such as we're going to be talking about momentarily, and to establish the ordinances and contract with collection haulers and submit annual waste reports. Now, interested public agencies may negotiate a formal agreement that specifies what common powers they may be willing to share and other mutually acceptable arrangements, also known as a joint powers agreement. In HWMA's case, broadly, we have been responsible for the transportation and disposal of solid waste of our member agencies and the closure and post-closure monitoring of the Cummings Road landfill and development of diversion programs such as approved by the board and or our member agencies. For example, our handling the curbside processing agreement for the participating agencies. Now, with the passage of AB 939, or the California Waste Management Act, each county also has to establish a local task force for the purposes of ensuring a coordinated and cost-effective regional recycling system. And then they are also responsible for performing some state-mandated duties, including maintaining the countywide integrated waste management plan, to advise the county and the cities in meeting AB 939 requirements and other waste diversion mandates, and to provide assistance to jurisdictions on solid waste and recycling infrastructure needs, as well as expanding existing facilities where appropriate. So returning to SB 1383, sources of short-lived climate pollutants include petroleum-based transportation fuels, also referred to as black carbon, agriculture, including the fluorinated, excuse me, I'm sorry, I backed up. The three targets are black carbon, fluorinated gases, and methane. And specifically, looking at the sources of industries being petroleum-based, agriculture, waste disposal, and gases that are used in refrigeration, air cooling systems, as well as methane. This particular piece of legislation requires coordination through the California Air Resources Control Board, number one, with state agencies, and as well as the Department of Food and Agriculture and CalRecycle. The combined approaches and efforts are expected to achieve a 50% reduction of black carbon and a 40% reduction of the fluorinated and methane gases. SB 1383 is, simply put, the most significant pollutant reduction mandate to be adopted in California in the last 30 years. Specific to the solid waste industry, these mandates are going to impact our solid waste services, and it will revolutionize how California disposes of organic materials by requiring organics waste recycling in nearly every jurisdiction. The legislation has significant policy and legal implications for state and local governments. SB 1383 establishes a statewide target and is not a jurisdiction organic recycling target like we saw with AB 1826, which was the mandatory organics commercial recycling. Given that it is a statewide target and not a jurisdiction target, The regulation is requiring a more prescriptive approach than we have seen in AB 939, which is what most of us have been familiar with. CalRecycle has to adopt regulations that impose requirements that are necessary to meet these statewide targets. And SB 1383 regulation is more similar to, AB 32 in that it identifies specific actions rather than targets that are to be met. So AB 32 established greenhouse gas reduction targets for the state. And of course, they implemented the cap and trade regulations, which require businesses to take specific actions. So individual businesses aren't going to be required to achieve a specific target, but they are required to take actions that will be prescribed by specific dates. The legislation is broad, it's prescriptive, and implementation is quite complex. The presentation this evening is going to present a high-level overview to provide board members an outline of the requirements of the jurisdictions are required to meet. This information was provided by CalRecycle representatives to our local task force members in December of 2020. This particular presentation for this evening will be available to your staff members so that they can tailor and present this information to your respective councils for the appropriate programmatic direction and the budgetary considerations that will be necessary in the upcoming year. So when we're talking about organic waste in the context of SB 1383, this means green waste, wood waste, pre and post-consumer food, but also fibers such as paper and cardboard. The measure ultimately requires a 75% reduction of the level of statewide disposal of organic waste by 2025. And it's based on disposal levels from 2014. And that was when the state of California last did a statewide waste characterization study. And HWMA was one of the participants in that study. Additionally, programs to divert 20% of the commercial edible food from being disposed will also need to be implemented. Organic waste currently comprises approximately 2/3 of the state's waste disposal stream, and food waste alone is the largest waste stream at 18%. In addition to diverting the food waste from landfills, SB 1383 is also going to require that Californians divert those pre-consumer edible foods that are currently disposed of into food recovery programs. That are currently disposed to landfill and have it diverted so that it gets put into food recovery programs. And the goal is to divert approximately 20% of the currently disposed edible food. The difficulty here is that the state doesn't actually know how much of the food in the waste stream is edible. CalRecycle has conducted a waste characterization study in 2018 to help examine the food waste stream in order to determine how much may be able to be diverted. But they're still, fine-tuning some of that information. And ultimately, what the state does know is that 1 in 5 children go hungry every night in California, and redirecting perfectly edible food that is currently being disposed of to help those in need could alleviate this. So to kind of restate, the intent is to bridge the issue of food insecurity and organics disposed and reduced short-lived climate pollutants that are associated with landfill emissions. And this legislation was established to mandate that that jurisdictions expand edible food recovery efforts and reduce organic material which is disposed of to landfills. To meet the deadline of January 1st, 2022, CalRecycle is expecting that jurisdictions are planning and making programmatic and budgetary decisions regarding the requirements in advance of the deadline. And this is going to include providing organic service to all residents and businesses, establishing an edible food recovery program, conducting education and outreach, procurement, and capacity planning for the necessary infrastructure. And of course, starting, and here's where I'm running into a little bit of an issue, starting in January 1st, 2024, jurisdictions will be required to take enforcement action against non-compliant entities. There are additional additional details in the draft regulations regarding the enforcement requirements. So I'm not going to go into this because they're pretty arduous and detailed. It should be noted that CalRecycle does have limited funding through a competitive grant program as well as a loan program to help to establish infrastructure for the recycling of organic waste and recovering edible food. However, for the programmatic activities such as the enforcement, inspection, education, and collection, jurisdictions are going to have to plan for budgetary changes and establishing or expanding fees to address the increased cost. To assist jurisdictions, CalRecycle's released a number of tools that jurisdictions can use, such as a model enforcement ordinance, franchise agreement models, and educational materials. Using the 2018 and 2020 statewide waste characterization studies, jurisdictions will have some data needed in order to conduct some of the capacity planning requirements for their localized jurisdictions. Although the regulations are in the final stages of being approved, the major components are not expected to change. Local governments need to be acting now in order to have the programmatic and budgetary changes and the applicable ordinances adopted and in place by January 1st of 2022. So the organics diversion strategies are going to entail the general topics that you see here on this screen, and I'll further expand on them in a moment. But one of the things that everybody asks whenever we talk about any state legislation that's coming down the pike is, well, can we be exempt? Are there any waivers? And quite frankly, the answer is waivers will be available to 3 of our local jurisdictions, and that is due to their size. But I want to emphasize that it's only going to be temporary. These waivers are going to require that an application be submitted probably about December, and the jurisdiction has to be compliant with AB 1826, which was the organics diversion. And it's only going to be good for a 2-year period, after which those jurisdictions are expected to be compliant, to at least move towards compliance with SB 1383. So as noted, jurisdictions are going to be required to adequately resource the development of all these programs, and portions of the programs are going to be new. Several of these programs are going to be new. I'm speaking all backwards. Some of these programs are existing and will need to be expanded, and some of these programs will need to be newly established. So the most basic of the regulation is that jurisdictions are going to be required to provide organic waste collection service to each of their residents and businesses. The regulations are also requiring that all residents and businesses must use an organic waste recycling service that meets the regulatory requirements. Jurisdictions must have enforceable requirements on their haulers that collect the organic waste in the jurisdiction, and also for commercial and residential generators and self-haulers. So there's a lot of detail regarding the types of allowable collection programs, and these are just some of the high-level requirements here. I'm going to throw all of these up just to be a little easier here. So this is going to apply to all organic waste, which means green waste, wood waste, food waste, manure, and fibers. Containers will be required to meet a uniform container color, any shade of gray or black for trash, green for organic waste, and blue containers for traditional recyclables. And this needs to be in place by January of 2036. The timeline is extended out into the future so that it allows your contracted waste haulers to do a complete phase in over time, so in order to kind of minimize some of the cost of simply buying all new containers and changing them out. There will be container labeling and contamination monitoring requirements. Jurisdictions are going to be required to assess the current collection programs. This is your franchise haulers, and determine what may need to be expanded or changed. And this is going to include geographic collection areas. This is going to shift all of us from the combination of both voluntary and mandatory, or sometimes universal collection service that we refer to. And this legislation is requiring that collection service is mandatory to all residents and businesses that are served by franchises. Now, there is some contradictory information to date about imposing mandatory curbside and route collection in areas that self-haul is the predominant means of transporting solid waste and recyclables. And for instance, I will use myself. I live here in the small burg of Orick, and we don't have curbside programs. If this goes forward, and there's some clarification on this item, it's entirely possible that the county is going to be required to extend franchise collection of materials to all rural communities and up some of those far-flung areas. Yeah, so as presented, CalRecycle appears to be requiring that all counties in the county have curbside collection services for trash, recycling, and organics processing, which certainly is going to pose a pretty serious challenge for the larger rural communities. RCRC has been very active and tracking and trying to have input with CalRecycle on this particular component of the legislation. There is also a provision in the regulations that will enable households to potentially be granted waivers by a jurisdiction if somebody's wanting to do home composting, but those details are still being worked out, and it is likely that the jurisdiction will have to periodically perform inspections to ensure that that is the case. The same rules that are going to be applying to the entities that are not subject to local control, such as state agencies, the UC, the CSUs, community colleges and K-12 schools will be required to be overseen by CalRecycle. So they'll be implementing the same regs as these entities. SB 1383 is also requiring for the first time that local jurisdictions be responsible for strengthening the existing infrastructure for edible food recovery and food distribution in their communities. So for all Tier 1 and Tier 2 commercial edible food generators, this means that the jurisdiction is going to have to ensure that there are edible food recovery organizations that have sufficient capacity to both receive, handle, and distribute recoverable food. And this may entail providing funding to ensure that there is that adequate capacity and collection service. So even in the communities where there's a voluntary infrastructure that already exists, there will be new record keeping and inspection tasks that will need to be implemented by the jurisdiction. Jurisdictions are going to have to assess the capacity of existing food recovery, to establish a food recovery program, and to expand the existing infrastructure if necessary, to inspect commercial generators for compliance, and that would be specifically, for instance, your local grocery stores, and monitoring and auditing what they should not be throwing at the back end, as well as performing education and outreach. Jurisdictions are going to have to assess the infrastructure that exists within their community. They're going to have to identify how many commercial generators they have, how much edible food that they could be donating to food recovery programs, how many food recovery organizations exist, and what is their capacity to receive this edible food, and what gaps exist in the current infrastructure, and what would be necessary in order to close them. How do we as a community then fund the expansion of edible food recovery organizations, whether this would be through grants, partnerships, or sponsorships? And what partnerships currently exist and what partnerships need to be established? And this is just for the edible food recovery component of SB 1383. And this is the jurisdictions we'll have to work on. Jurisdictions are also going to be required to conduct education and outreach to all generators and all businesses and residents regarding collection service requirements, the contamination standards, the self-haul requirements, as well as overall compliance with 1383. Commercial edible food generators will have to meet all of the items that I discussed in the aforementioned slide, and all educational material is going to have to be accessible to non-English speaking residents. Jurisdictions will be required to procure certain levels of compost, renewable gas used for transportation fuels, electricity, heating applications, or pipeline injection, or electricity from biomass conversion, which is produced from the organic waste. Each jurisdiction will have a minimum procurement target, which is linked to their population. CalRecycle is going to notify the jurisdictions of their target prior to January 1st of 2022. The jurisdiction can decide what mix of compost, mulch, biomass-derived electricity, or renewable gas that they want to use in order to meet their target. CalRecycle will provide a calculator with the conversion factors for compost, renewable gas, electricity from biomass conversion made from organic waste for a jurisdiction to use so that they can calculate their progress moving towards meeting the target. One of the things that we want to make clear is that procurement doesn't necessarily mean purchase, although in some cases it does. A jurisdiction that produces its own compost, mulch, renewable gas, or electricity can use that towards the procurement target. And the same goes for the jurisdiction's direct service providers, for example, their haulers. So a jurisdiction can use compost or mulch for erosion control as a soil amendment, for soil cover, for the parks, open spaces, and other open spaces. A jurisdiction can certainly use renewable gas to fuel their fleets, or a jurisdiction's waste hauler could use renewable gas to fuel their trucks. Renewable gas can be used for the transportation fuels, electricity, or heating applications, such as an anaerobic digester if you need to have that heated up. SB 1383 is also going to require that jurisdictions procure recycled content paper when it is available at the same price or less than virgin material. That's a pretty common procurement that many of us are already familiar with. So by January 1st of 2022, jurisdictions are going to be required to have an enforcement mechanism or ordinance in place, yet they are not required to enforce the ordinance provisions until 2024. Between January 2022 and December of 2023, jurisdictions are going to have to identify those businesses that are in violation and provide educational materials to those generators. The focus is built in so that the first 2 years is going to have an emphasis on educating generators, and the goal is to ensure that every generator has an opportunity to comply before the mandatory jurisdiction enforcement goes into effect in 2024. The regulation after January of 2024, jurisdictions will then have to take more progressive enforcement against organic waste generators that are not in compliance. And there's a pretty lengthy list that I'm actually just going to skip over, other than to say it is pretty arduous the way they have things set up in this progressive discipline. So you get your 30-day notice, your 90-day notice, and then you start moving into other actions if a generator is deemed out of compliance, along with fines that are set with a minimum penalty fine. So, really the key tool around this one here is going to be the early development of a robust educational program so that we can minimize the amount of future enforcement that jurisdictions will have to take against their residents and businesses. Kind of have an editorial comment, but I'll bite my tongue. If a jurisdiction is looking to be using a 3 or a 2 bin organic waste collection service, they're going to be required to do, number 1, an annual compliance review of commercial businesses, just as they should already be doing underneath AB 1826. So basically those commercial businesses that are generating 2 cubic yards or more per week of solid waste, whether that's trash, organics, and recycling. And commercial businesses do include multifamily dwelling units of 5 units or more. There can be a desk audit, which is conducted in order to review the reports from the franchise haulers to verify that the service is being provided, or that they are complying through self-hauling or backhauling of materials. With respect to some additional reviews that are required, there will have to be some route reviews. Jurisdictions are supposed to conduct a review of the routes of commercial businesses and residential areas, and they're to be monitored to verify the subscriptions in order to validate the desk review, and then take a look at whether or not the business has the appropriate external containers that they are to be using. And if the business is not using the hauler service, then verifying that the business is self-hauling the organics material will be necessary. As noted earlier, this is the same type of action that AB 1826 is already requiring. Jurisdictions will also be required to monitor for contamination. They're going to have to randomly select containers and ensure that all collection routes are being reviewed annually, and that contamination is being monitored in the collection container, and that education is provided if there is an issue with that generator. A jurisdiction does have the option of conducting waste composition studies every 6 months to identify if there are prohibited container contaminants. If there's more than a 25% prohibited container contaminant, then additional education is going to have to be provided to generators. And the route reviews could be performed by franchise haulers, but of course that would be an amendment of their agreements as an additional service. If it's a single unsegregated collection service, jurisdictions are going to have to verify that their hauler is transporting contents to a high diversion organic waste processing facility, and that the facility is meeting the requirements of the organic content recovery rate. In maybe more lay language, what we're talking about here is a pretty high-end materials recovery facility that would sort through all of the material and ensure the ability of pulling out organic material out of the trash, of which we don't have a MRF here. So that could be something that we'd be looking at in addition to other aspects of regional infrastructure. In order to support the edible food recovery program, straight up, this kind of inspection is going to be new for all of our jurisdictions. The jurisdictions are going to need to plan for the resources in order to conduct these inspections. And certainly it would make a lot of sense if the cities could coordinate and make some form of proposal to put forward to the county environmental health department, because they have inspectors who are already visiting the food waste generators, and they could be developing some mechanisms for the information to be regularly reported back to the cities. Inspections on the Tier 1 edible food generators in 2022 and Tier 2 in 2024. You're going to have to verify that they have arrangements with food recovery organizations, as well as verifying that the food generators are not intentionally spoiling food that can't be recovered. That can be recovered, excuse me. There are additional requirements that jurisdictions are going to be required to meet that are going to require familiarity specific to their respective jurisdictions, departments, and staff members. In terms of the record-keeping requirements, all jurisdictions are going to have to maintain information in an implementation record, and many of the sections that are identified here are going to have a minimum level of record-keeping, such as the ordinances, the contracts, and franchise agreements. And this graphic is really just a snapshot in order to kind of identify those items that are going to be required to be in the implementation record. And of course, CalRecycle staff may review the implementation record as part of their audit at any time. The implementation record is going to have to be stored in one central location. It can be kept as either a physical or an electronic record, and it needs to be accessible to CalRecycle staff within 10 business days, and it has to be retained for a period of not less than 5 years. So each jurisdiction is also going to have to plan for adequate capacity for edible food recovery and for recycling of organic waste. For edible food recovery capacity, each jurisdiction is going to have to plan to cover 20% of the edible food for human consumption, and they must identify those tier 1 and tier 2 commercial edible food generators and secure necessary funding for any necessary edible food recovery infrastructure. Each county is expected to lead this effort by coordinating with the cities in the county to estimate the existing, new, and or need for expanded capacity. Counties and cities must demonstrate that they have access to recycling capacity through existing contracts, franchise agreements, or other documented arrangements, such as a memorandum of understanding with HWMA or a private contractor for the development and processing of organics infrastructure. There are requirements for each jurisdiction to consult with specified entities to determine what the organic waste recycling capacity will be. And these entities will include the local enforcement agency, the local task force that we discussed a few moments ago, the owners and operators of facilities, community composting operations, and from citizens such as the disadvantaged communities in order to discuss the benefits and impacts that are associated with the expansions or the proposed facility placement. For edible food recovery, the county and the city is going to have to contract with edible food recovery organizations that serve that jurisdiction to determine how much new and or planned capacity is going to be necessary. If capacity cannot be guaranteed, then each jurisdiction within the county that lacks capacity must submit an implementation schedule to CalRecycle that includes specified timelines and milestones, including the funding that will be necessary for the development of the infrastructure. The county must collect data from cities on a specified schedule and report to CalRecycle. Cities are required to provide the required data to the county within 120 days. And the starting of the year is for this purpose is going to be for 2022. So that report's going to have to cover 2022 through that 2023. Subsequent reports are going to be required to be due every 5 years and planning for a 10-year planning horizon. So as introduced, SB 1383 is not limited to just food diversion or organics processing. Jurisdictions are also going to have to adopt an ordinance and or other enforceable requirements that requires compliance with CalGreen and water efficient landscape ordinance requirements. This is going to provide readily accessible areas for recycling containers in commercial and multifamily units. Recycling organic waste to be commingled with C&D debris would have to meet CalGreen's 65% requirement for C&D recycling in both residential and non-residential projects, and require new construction and landscaping projects to meet water efficient landscape requirements for compost and mulch application. So in California, statewide, there are about 180 compost facilities, with 34 of them accepting food waste statewide. There are 14 anaerobic digestion facilities which accept waste, and there are a number of wastewater treatment plants that could potentially be leveraged for use of co-digestion of food waste, but it isn't clear if there is local capacity here in Humboldt County for that. It's going to take a significant number of new facilities statewide to recycle the additional 20 to 25 million tons of organic waste annually. Because remember, it's not a local target; it's a statewide target that they're looking at. And CalRecycle is estimating that the state is going to require between 50 and 100 new or expanded facilities. Now, Locally, in the early 2000s, HWMA entered into a public-private partnership for the development of Mad hardwoods to divert and compost green waste from HWMA and the city of Arcata customers who were self-hauling their green waste material. Over the years, that particular service has expanded in volume due to a greater number of customers who are delivering green waste, in addition of green waste collection and hauling services that have been added in, for example, to the city of Eureka and in some areas in the county. And of course, with these new requirements underneath AB 1826, that organic material be diverted for composting or processing. That facility is permitted to process 10,000 tons annually of green waste. That particular facility is prohibited under their permit from accepting food waste. So they would have to get an amendment of their conditional use permit if they were to expand there. Preliminary conversations that I've had with those representatives have indicated that that's just more than they would be prepared to take on, and they're pretty pressed for space, quite frankly, in there. In addition, there was a partnership with HWMA, the City of Eureka, and Recology from 2009 until 2014, in which HWMA undertook a food waste collection and diversion project to examine the potential development of a regional food waste project using an anaerobic digestion. When the findings were presented to our member agencies in late 2014, there was a lack of commitment towards developing a curbside collection service and to direct that collected food waste material to HWMA. And we oftentimes refer to that as flow control. Because we don't have any assurance, in or flow control, HWMA was unable to move forward with the financing, the planning, or permitting that would be necessary to build a multi-million-dollar infrastructure without having some form of commitment to have that food or organic waste. Member agency staff have continued to work on their own to address food waste diversion, primarily through education, food recovery, and encouraging small and medium scale use of compost or vermiculture or other low-tech approaches within their respective communities. The local task force, which is comprised of city staff representatives from each city and the county, has discussed this topic several times over the years since 2017. However, the specifics of developing a regional processing and capacity facility needs has stalled. HWMA and Recology representatives regularly attend these meetings. So far as CalRecycle is concerned, they will be authorizing the low population and rural area waivers. And in the case of entities such as public universities, which may be exempt from local solid waste oversight, CalRecycle will be directly responsible for ensuring their compliance. This, of course, will be monitored through their existing state agency monitoring process. CalRecycle will be enforcing jurisdictional compliance. For example, they're going to be verifying that all organic waste generators have service and that jurisdictions are providing education, and they will be issuing notices of violation within correct timeframes. And I want to remind everybody, yet again, this is a statewide target. It's not a jurisdiction organic waste diversion target. And SB 1383, unlike AB 939, they prohibit the jurisdiction target. And so as a result, these regulations are more prescriptive, and they do establish state minimum standards. Jurisdictions are going to have to demonstrate compliance with each of the prescriptive standards rather than the determination of a good faith effort, which is what CalRecycle oftentimes has done when they come out and do their inspections here. And they're going to be looking at a suite of indicators to determine whether or not a jurisdiction is actively trying to implement programs and achieve the targets. And of course, under 1383 regulations, If CalRecycle determines that a jurisdiction is violating one or more of the requirements, they will be noticed. They will have 90 days to correct, as well as the development of possible corrective action plans. And quite frankly, it's going to be a progressive but a very firm approach to to ensure compliance. One of the things, we've all heard this said at different meetings, but the failure of a governing body to adopt an ordinance or to adequately fund or resource a program is not considered a substantial effort or an extenuating circumstance, and it won't allow that a violation wouldn't be issued. So they're basically saying ignorance is not going to be an excuse to sliding out of this. So in terms of some local efforts to date, as previously mentioned, we do have the green waste processing agreement, and we had undertaken the anaerobic digestion facility. And of course, there's the local task force meetings, which I encourage folks to participate in. More efforts to date, HWMA has undertaken the waste characterization study, which was initiated in February of last year. Because of the pandemic, we did have to postpone the second round of sampling, and that is going to commence in June of this year. We anticipate that the final report will be available to the board and the public by this fall. One of the things that this particular waste characterization audit included was an evaluation of those edible foods that could be deemed recoverable, just trying to get a sense of whether we were having grocery stores or whatever just dumping some of their materials as part of that audit. The cities of Arcata and Eureka submitted a joint application with Food for People and Humboldt State University for a food rescue project. This project was not specific to SB 1383. However, the information that is derived from it will help to populate some of the information that the jurisdictions are going to need to be gathering. And of course, the cities of Ferndale and Fortuna and Rio Dell, they are actively engaged right now in conversations with their franchise hauler to look at amending those 3 collection agreements and identify ways in which there's some standardization and a uniform approach to being able to serve the collection services in that area. So in your packet, there was a summary checklist, and the state has contracted with HF&H. It's a consulting firm based in the Bay Area, and they are helping to develop the tools, model ordinances, and hauling agreements, as well as a checklist to help local jurisdictions get started. And in the packet itself, I've included it. It's pretty nice, succinct, roadmap for the different actions that need to be met to be in compliance. And so, if you haven't already taken a look at this, please do, and probably more importantly, circulate it to your staff so that they can start developing the internal information they need to keep your jurisdiction in compliance. So certainly, for HWMA's board of directors, we're encouraging that as representatives that you ask your staff to present to your respective city council and board of supervisors a presentation describing the approach, the necessary resources, and the timeline that your jurisdiction is going to need or use to meet SB 1383's requirements. And certainly encourage from respective city council and the board of supervisors meeting and being explicit around the encouragement of council conversation and discussion and a determination of regional coordination efforts that will be necessary for planning and development. And strongly encourage that your staff attend SB 1383 webinars and to review the available implementation roadmaps in order to enable appropriate strategic implementation. And here's a couple of websites for your use. So it's pretty monumental. I think that there's certainly going to be an opportunity for HWMA and other private or public entities to find a role to play, but the conversation really needs to occur first within the jurisdictions, and then we can start identifying where are those opportunities, because collectively this is going to be a pretty heavy lift for all of our communities. SB 1383 does make the provision so that local jurisdictions are able to establish charges in order to fund a pretty wide array of programs. This is not going to be insignificant. I've heard some jurisdictions talking about 40% plus rate increases. Down in the San Diego area, they've already begun distribution of organics containers and doing that collection. So many jurisdictions that have more resources at their availability are actively implementing the state requirements. So with that, I'm going to conclude my report. I would ask the chair if he would mind if Linda Wise could address the board as well, because she has been immersed. I mean, this is a long presentation and most of the other presentations go on for 4+ hours. So I've done my best to consolidate everything so that you can at least get your heads wrapped around it.
Yeah, I would like to hear from Linda. And to be quite honest with you, a lot of what you're presenting, other than the last meeting or two where the 1383 has come up, this is all new to me. I mean,
It is.
I have not heard this. This meeting that you talk about, it's the Humboldt County, it's the county.
The local task force.
Local task force. That you said that meets regularly and talks about this?
They meet regularly, and this is one of many topics they discuss, but specifically at the December meeting, they had a presentation from Calorie Cycle. Both Linda and myself are very aware that the conversation around 1383 has not been making it to the council or board of supervisors level. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to go ahead and provide this presentation to you. It's a little uncomfortable. It's a little bit of that chicken and the egg in terms of which comes first. Typically, when you're looking at these state mandates, your staff is working on it typically internally, but we're just not seeing those conversations, and there is a ticking clock, and we want to make sure that HWMA representatives are aware of it. So if you could go back to your respective jurisdictions and ask your representatives, what is the plan for ensuring that we are in compliance moving forward? When I spoke with jurisdiction staff, this last year has been really pretty arduous on everybody, and everybody is pretty, their plates are full. And I think that, like I said, the lift on this is just going to be tremendous. And I think they need a little help being asked, what are we doing on this? How can we help? What do you need in terms of policy direction? What do we need to do from a financial perspective to make sure that we are moving forward with the key mechanisms so that we can meet that January 1st date?
Well, and I think I've heard other directors in other places as well, particularly here. I know Rex has commented on it several times, that the big scapegoat of everything is it's a pandemic, gosh.
Mm-hmm.
So if something's not getting done, then we blame the pandemic and whether we were going to get it done in the first place. And so I guess I'm not alone in the fact that I'm not the only one that hasn't heard of this 1383 for whatever reason.
That would be correct. That would be correct.
All right, I'm gonna leave that alone. I guess, if Recology, Linda from Recology would like to give us some input, I would appreciate that.
Thank you. And I want to say to all of you, thank you for bringing this up tonight. And I'm glad it's coming up to in the presentation. Jill did a really good job of kind of congealing it into a smaller package, but there is a lot more to that. I attended what was a short meeting from the state representatives on Cal Recycle, and it took 3 hours. And there were still, a lot of details that I didn't have. I want to say that all of your staff, care very deeply about this and around the waste issues. And when they come to the table, they do have very true, doing a lot of work in the waste area. I do for Rio Dell, Ferndale, and Fortuna. We began talking about framing universal collection in that area, with the idea of being able to check off some of the boxes that's going to be required with 1383. The timeline is very, very, very tight with compliance. For us to be able to get equipment on the ground and get something going would take us at least 18 months after we reestablished some contracts. And that's going to take a long time as well, just not on ourselves, but also on each jurisdiction's legal staff. I want to make sure that there's, my coming here is that there's realistic expectations about how quickly these programs can be implemented. At least 18 months for me to get a truck from the date of when we can get a contract going. And that doesn't include all the ordinances that the cities and county have to write themselves. So I want to impress on you that this is important to be starting as quickly as possible. And we'll do what we can to work with the jurisdictions to be able to work on being able to illustrate benchmarks that are being met as far as our collection services and the franchise agreements are concerned. There, as you heard from Jill, that there are several other aspects to this law that don't involve us. But again, to change our contracts, we'll need some time, and we have limited bandwidth as well. So I wanted to put that out, and if you have any questions for me, you can.
All right. Does anyone have questions for Linda?
I do, Frank.
Go ahead.
It's lovely. Will there be some sample contracts available, just to kind of make that process more efficient, or how can we collaborate kind of across different jurisdictions on those contracts potentially?
Can I answer that, Jill?
Absolutely.
Because we're working on this right now. There are that organization that put together the sample ordinances, the one with the checklist. They've worked with the state with doing sample ordinances and franchise agreements. But as Maggie pointed out earlier, there's not cookie cutter, and sometimes some of those ordinances don't apply to rural communities. So we're putting in some language with Fortuna, Rio Dell, and Fortuna based on some of those sample ordinances that are going to meet those requirements, and franchise agreements. I think what we'll have to everyone's franchise agreement is different. They're all different, and not just that they apply to different communities, but they're written so differently. And so we're going to have to spend some time to review where your franchise agreements fall short of the 1383.
And I want to add, when you're talking about the ordinances, you're not talking about a blank slate. The cities and the county already have a series of solid waste ordinances, and those existing ordinances are going to need to be evaluated and compared to these new requirements. And of course, each jurisdiction has different. And so they're going to have to view it through the lens of their jurisdiction. I mean, that's why it's been really kind of difficult, because we've heard a couple times, Linda and myself, oh, Recology is the one that will do this, right? Or we hear HWMA will do this, right? It's like, well, no, you're the jurisdiction, and you have control over your world, and there are aspects that could be delegated or through some form of a contract, but the jurisdiction is in the driver's seat. And so we're here to help in whatever capacity we can. And, but we do have limitations because we're not city council. We don't have all, broad authority. HWMA says do this, that's not the way that this was set up. So you'll have to take a look at your ordinance as well as the specifics of your franchise agreements and evaluate and amend from there.
I'm not sure where to go next with this. Are there any other questions? I guess any other directors have questions for?
Yeah, Frank, through the chair.
Yes.
Back in 2014, the anaerobic, the other thing is we didn't know if we could provide enough material to run the anaerobic. I mean, that was number one, considering what the cost would be to run it, and then the millions and millions. But you have to understand that almost 45% of our population actually lives within about 120 square miles in Humboldt County. The rest of the population lives in the other 4,280 square miles, which means they're all over hell and be gone. And a lot of those are self-hauls, and a lot of those are just areas we're not going to be able to get to. And I mean, and be cost efficient. I mean, 40%, you say a 40% increase. I mean, it's going to be more than that. I mean, by the time you decide where we're going to get rid of it, what we're going to do with it. And I mean,
that's not my number. That was provided by the state. They kind of thought, it would be this. And I'm like, yeah, if it's 40%,
well, those are my
state,
numbers.
it's way bigger.
I'm just going off my numbers of where we're at, because like you said, RCRC, we miss being on that. Every other county but one below us on density in the state is not in the program.
Right.
Because they hit that 75,000, I think was and I know we're trying to get a density level so we can go density 2 square miles also. Because I mean, you can have 75,000 people in 800 square miles in a smaller, in a smaller area, but we've got 4,480 or whatever square miles. And this is going to be a lot bigger. I mean, I see a 75% increase in collection fees if we're actually going to do this or we're going to get a lot of people that are going to have compost piles that they never compost. And I mean, I have my own misgivings with Cal Recycle. You got to remember, those are the people we're looking for to help us on our beverage recycling, and that's working so well. So it's a long road to hoe. And if you start sending trucks out to some of the areas we're talking about, the carbon footprint's going to far exceed the methane. And I know there was talk about methane. I know we're going to Dry Creek, and I know they collect methane, but Dry Creek caps every night, if I'm not mistaken, don't they?
They only have when they've got a cell that is open, it's less than 5 acres. It's like 3 acres that's open, and then when they've filled that part of the capacity, then they cap it. So they don't cap it every night, but they cap each cell. So at any given time, only 3 acres is open, not the entire acreage.
Yeah, okay.
Any other board members have a comment or questions for Recology or for Jill? Go ahead, Leslie.
I'm just curious if you could say a little bit more about the potential role of the local task force, or we talked briefly about it being stalled, but like how could that kind of maybe play a bigger role in this? How would you imagine that?
I think the primary challenge with the task force is these are folks whose plates are already really full. How are representatives of the task force designated, they come from your respective city managers. So the city managers will identify who, including themselves, who in the staff capacity will serve as a representative from that entity. The city of Arcata's lost a lot of sort of institutional memory, if you will, with some recent retirements. And I know that with the city of Eureka, you've got two new folks that have been stepping in, and their enthusiasm, I think, is what really keeps a lot of people coming into the meetings and happy to engage. But this is a really, really heavy lift. And I think that what they need to hear from councils is that this is a priority, and we need to make sure that the allocation of time and resources will be designated so that these folks can, really be focused and, really identifying some leadership within the community that can help spur this forward. This is really large. I don't know right now of folks that really have that sort of capacity, and I think the drive is there, but really the capacity to do the strategic presentation of how do we move forward. And so I don't know if it's going to be the strategic task force, excuse me, the local task force, if it's a matter of bringing in some consultant work or something, but strategically there just needs to be an outline of the pathway forward. Now, the ESJPA is it's the Environmental Service Joint Powers Authority, and it's a kind of it's different, but it's related to RCRC. They produced a phenomenal roadmap for counties to use in guiding what their approach is going to be. I do not know if there is something similar that California League of Cities has put together. I kind of think they might have, but I really feel like now's the time to get all the resources on deck. The local task force is going to need to figure out the regional planning and capacity needs of the organic material. And the jurisdictions are going to have to decide whether they want to do it on their own or to be working regionally. And if there's going to be working regionally, developing some mechanism through a contract, memorandum of agreement, or something that gives flow control so that you can see the development of either a private, public, or a public-private sort of infrastructure. So, I mean, right now it's kind of a blank slate, and I think that's the difficulty. And each of the jurisdictions thus far has been wanting to kind of take their own pathway. And really, we need to be working on the development of a road that is incorporating all of the jurisdictions instead of various things. So I wish I had a really simple, easy answer for you, but you all have such diversity in terms of the respective councils and the board of supervisors. We really need the councils to take it up as a conversation and give some, just some general principles of agreement for what you're looking for to provide that direction to both your staff, as well as how, certainly myself, Linda, anybody else in the private sector could be looking towards as we are developing proposals for your consideration. I hope that helps.
Yeah. Am I correct in getting that this is actually a pretty big deal?
This is huge.
Because if nothing else, it's just going to be it looks like a bureaucratic pile that that jurisdictions are going to have to deal with, along with the physical implementation of who's got what and where's it go and what do I do with it, and then what do I do with it? You can't put it in the landfill, and you can't.
So you're correct, and I would say that just the requirements around identifying edible food waste and tracking that. I mean, that's a whole program by itself that's going to require staffing and a place and funding in order to bring those things jurisdiction by jurisdiction. Now, what we know about JPAs is that if you all decide that that is a responsibility that you want to delegate to a JPA, that can certainly be done. In the case of HWMA, it's not currently in our wheelhouse, but it could be something that we could amend, but it would require a full amendment of the Joint Powers Authority. Or likewise, all the cities could decide that they want to enter into some sort of a memorandum of agreement or agreement with the County of Humboldt, so that the County of Humboldt becomes that centralized location in order to help coordinate. So, I mean, there's any array of vehicles that could be used. I would encourage, if there's a way to get the administrative efficiencies by consolidating, that would be great, but you still need to have that conversation first with your councils.
Is this agency that the task force, I guess, that we're
Yeah,
talking
they're
about?
not an agency. They're like a committee.
Well, they're a committee, but who, I mean, is somebody chair?
Ad hoc.
Yes.
It's an ad hoc of this?
No,
You're-
it's required by the state underneath AB 939. And the state requires that each county have a solid waste local task force, and the membership and the composition of that task force, they are required by statute to meet certain requirements, but the cities and the county have the discretion to determine how many people will be on it, where they're going to be from, and the decision of the cities and the County Board of Supervisors was that it's an 8-member committee, and it's comprised of 1 representative from each city. It can be anyone from your city manager to a staff person, with the city manager responsible for the designation of the individual. They have to meet a minimum of 1 time a year. There was a couple of years where we only met once. Right now, they're meeting more quarterly, as everybody's been trying to kind of get their arms wrapped around both AB 1826 as well as SB 1383.
So does somebody chair this, or how does it?
Yeah, the current chair, I pretty 99.9% sure. The current chair is Donna Wood. She's with the city of Eureka. And the meetings are all noticed. Donna Wood, she's also on the line tonight. And
Who's the county's representative?
Tom Matson is the county representative.
Does he go?
Yes, he does.
How about Riadell?
Kyle does attend, yes. It's been a lot easier doing things on Zoom. We get much higher attendance.
On something like this, I would actually expect that. It would be. Let me see. Okay, well, we have a council meeting next week. Well, I'll definitely get this approached. I don't know if it'll make it to the agenda, but we have a point where we bring up what happens like in these meetings.
Mm-hmm.
We can at least talk about it. I'm more concerned about what it's going to do, not today or tomorrow, but before 2022. It's going to become stuff that's just, as you mentioned, that are already full plates on, and we're all small jurisdictions, pretty much in the county, except, whatever small means. I'm just kind of befuddled because I don't, just kind of out of the blue, the more we talk about it, the larger it seems to, looks like it's going to dominate conversations that we really don't have time to dominate. We're still trying to figure out what to do with an empty Coke can. And those are the guys, as Rex said, that are trying to steer this boat, throwing out rules to do. I see a similar thing in our CEA where they do a thing for procurement, and they make up these numbers that they, still hard to get a clear answer where they get their numbers when each jurisdiction is going to have, here's your share of this number that's not a goal, but yet here it's a goal and here's your share. Mm-hmm. So you got to reduce your number by this much in order to make it happen hit a regulation some state official passed. So, where do we want, where's the next step we need to go here, Jill, for tonight?
So for this evening, there's no action which is being requested of the board. As I noted at the last meeting, this has been an issue and a concern. Linda and I have talked about this a lot. We bring it up with, staff whenever we can. And we did have that presentation in December. And then of course, Elaine asked the question at the last meeting, what are we doing about 1383? And so I've been working on trying to get this presentation down to something that you kind of get your arms wrapped around, because it's really easy to fall into the details. The regulations that are associated with it are pretty tremendous. So what I am hoping that you will each do is, as representatives, go back to your staff, whether it's the city manager or somebody who's handling solid waste, and say, hey, what are we doing? How do we get this elevated so that we're having conversations at the council level? I don't think it's a bad thing not to have all the answers. This thing is so large. I think it's really important to get it out in front of people so that they can begin to understand the complexity, so that there is both the community buy-in, the council buy-in, because it's going to cost money, and then developing a pathway forward. And in the course of that, identifying where is there overlap, where can we get the efficiencies of scale, so that as we're implementing things, we are working together regionally. So whether that's in the administrative sense, or the educational component, or even in the infrastructure development piece. I would expect that HWMA will have a role in there, but until jurisdictions say, we want HWMA to play a role, and we are willing to make a commitment of this tonnage so that you could start, planning and whatnot. I mean, there's some moving pieces. So I think the big thing is, hey, who knows about SB 1383? And most people are going to say, never heard of it. So initiate that conversation. Ask your staff, are you familiar with it? Can you give our council a presentation? Let's start that dialogue. City of Eureka is engaged in some strategic visioning, which is occurring right now. And, this would be a great opportunity to pull that into that process. I'm not certain what other kind of strategic activities are happening with other cities, but certainly getting 1383 onto the docket is going to be really important.
When is the next task force meeting? In March?
I believe it's in March. Donna, can you weigh in real quickly? Or maybe Robin, who can ever get to their mute button first.
He's talking, but he's muted.
I need to check the calendar real quick. One moment.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I don't have that off the top of my head.
You have two Robins on, be more definitive.
Okay. One is up. While we're filling and waiting for that, I want to get this wrapped up for tonight and move on, and not spend the whole evening on it. One is I would like us to definitely come back, and for sure each time that there's a meeting of the task force, that somehow that get reported back to the HWMA what takes place there, so we get a better understanding of that. I would also encourage, as Jill said, that we go to our prospective jurisdictions and try to get something moving and attention at the councils, where at least it comes up, because it's going to bite us all if we don't. I mean, this is pretty obvious, and 2022 isn't that far away. So did we get an answer on that meeting?
Yes, our next meeting is March 24th at 2 p.m.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Donna.
Okay, if we have no other further real discussion, I'm going to close this item out and move on to something else. I know we have a closed session. And
Can we hear public comment?
Sure. Go ahead, Leslie.
Sorry, Frank, I couldn't find my mute button. Linda would like to address the board again for public comment.
Oh, I was going to respond to something that the city of Rio Dell was commenting on. We're trying to see if we can put something together by the 16th city council meeting. But that was the only thing I was going to say.
By what meeting? By the 15th?
16th, your next meeting.
That's next,
But,
that's next Tuesday.
yeah, but we may not have it together by then, but certainly by March 2nd, we will.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I was gonna bring it up at least in this meeting. If we can have it as agendized or at least a presentation by yourself or somebody that would come and I'll request that tomorrow with Kyle that we have it agendized so that there can be a presentation to the council to get the gravity of what's going on here. And I recommend that to other councils. I know Arcata was working on some public meetings with theirs, so they're a little more proactive from what I've heard in these meetings.
And I do want to note that I promised the staff that once I got this presentation built and completed, that I would send it to them. That way they could take a look at it and customize it for their jurisdiction. And that would at least help to bring all of your council members to the same understanding that you guys are now developing at the moment. So we'll get them that information. Might take a little bit of time for them to do this. There's a really great 3-minute video that Cal Recycle has, and I actually had it so that it would be embedded in this presentation, but apparently my old version of PowerPoint doesn't support video, so I had to redo my presentation this morning. But I will send that link out as well, because any of you can take a look at it and just hit, YouTube, and it'll help further explain things too.
So you're going to forward that link to?
I will forward that as well.
Thank you. Did any other staff members have questions or comments?
I see no other public comment. However, if anybody is out there, you could give them a second.
Our board members have any other comments? Give you a chance.
I think Maggie would like to address the board.
Yeah, quick reminder, we don't want to have parallel realities. And there are community organizations, environmental organizations with areas of expertise that can be of help to your local jurisdictions. Our towns are very small, and we look forward to working closely with HWMA and your jurisdiction staff. We've had a lot of one-on-one conversations about how to move forward, what could be done. But I just want to remind you, there are community resources for such a rural community, pretty extraordinary resources and expertise. So we're here to help.
Thank you. Any raised hands, Tyler?
No, you are clear.
All right, I'm gonna close this out then and move on to, I guess is it executive report?
No, it's going to be a standing item for the CRV.
Oh, okay, that's our standing report on that.
Our standing report on the CRV. And, things are very fluid in the CRV world. So I do want to note that we provided a public comment to the Statewide Commission on Recycling and Marketing, that they support a proposed urgency letter on CRV redemption for submittal to Cali, PA, and the governor's office, and that was on February 3rd. And a copy of that letter was attached in your packet. Myself and Linda have been meeting regularly with the local grocers association and the North Coast Journal. For folks who hadn't seen it, the link is in your packet as well. They published an in-depth story on CRV buyback on their January 28th edition. And the story was initiated in September, and I think it was a real challenge, and Iridian did a fantastic job because she really captured all the various moving elements and the issues following the decertification of the 4 redemption centers. And she did a really great job. So that link is in the staff report. On February 1st, I had the opportunity to meet with the new Cal Recycle Director, Assemblymember Woods, Recology, the local Grocers Association, in order to review the CRV redemption status. Through that meeting, they did clarify that grocers are going to be obligated to pay the $100 a day, or they have to accept the CRV containers. Cal Recycle does list in their in-store redemption website that now shows that there are 43 locations in Humboldt County where consumers can redeem containers. Now, they are able to set limits that, that are considerably less than recycling centers take. My understanding is that there's a couple gas stations in Eureka, and they'll only cash out up to $2.50 a day, but they are redeeming those containers. One of the pieces of information that came out during this meeting is that Cal Recycle is supporting extension of the pilot program for an additional 5 projects with $5 million funding. Of course, this is going to require legislative approval. And if that is approved, it would be a competitive grant. It's kind of funny. The new director said, well, we have this idea. Maybe Humboldt could do appointments underneath this umbrella. And, you would have to make sure that it includes reverse vending machines. And I just like, yeah, okay. They would be looking at extending the sunset date to January 1st of 2022. Or excuse me, that would be extended. They don't have an end date at this time. I did ask during that meeting that if the legislation was going to be extended or amended, if they could please remove the statutory restriction of the pounds, of the allowable pounds per day daily load limit to 25 pounds per day. Board members will remember that the allowable daily load limit, if you want to bring material in, is 100 pounds of aluminum, 100 pounds of plastic, and 1,000 pounds of glass. Underneath the pilot project, they ratcheted it all down so that it was 25 pounds per day, end of story. And of course, we're trying to figure out how to alleviate the backlog of material that is out there. Their staff, interestingly enough, was unfamiliar with the details of that specific limitation because it hasn't come up in any other conversations. For a project to be approved with a reverse vending machine, HWMA would need to identify potential locations and partners. There have been a couple of the grocers in that grocers group who have said, we could be interested in potentially locating a reverse vending machine unit on our site. Some places they're not going to be well suited for it, but there at least is a receptiveness that we couldn't have gotten there a year ago. The city of Arcata approved a letter urging representatives to take urgent legislation for relief. The city of Eureka is scheduled to take up this issue on February 16th. I'm aware that the Board of Supervisors took up a letter, but there wasn't a authorization for the chair to sign. So Amy Nielsen sent me a draft tonight so that they can get a letter out to our representatives. The Statewide Recycling Commission's letter, which was approved on that February 3rd, echoes many of the same points that HWMA had expressed. And quite frankly, their letter really was actually more strident than I thought it would be, but it really illustrates how underserved the state of California is as a whole in the CRV program. The circuit rider for California League of Cities reached out last week. We had a great conversation last Friday, and there is an active interest in supporting the introduction of urgency or an emergency bill to enable recertification and operation by appointment and the lifting of allowable daily load limits. The deadline for urgency bill introduction is February 19th, which is why I'm encouraging that we get letters coming in so that we can distribute them as quickly as possible. Frank, I also received the City of Rio Del's letter this morning. So we also have the city of Rio Dell who's weighed in on this. The individual who I had discussed at last month's meeting, who was interested in the possibility of establishing a CRV redemption center, he is still wading through the information, and he is going to be contacting Cal Recycle to see about the possibility of establishing a redemption center in the Fortuna area. Again, RCRC, California League of Cities, CSAC, and Environmental Services, JPA, they also approved a letter that went out on Tuesday the 9th, urging the introduction of urgent legislation. There are quite frankly, I think the big thing right now is that League of Cities and RCRC is looking for representatives to introduce this urgency legislation that they are developing. They are both exploring both the traditional legislative pathway, and they are working with Cal Recycle to see if maybe there could be some tweaks and they can get it dropped into a budget trailer bill. And that looks like it might be the most viable pathway forward. So from here, today I feel like I'm giving homework to board members. I would really encourage each of you to please reach out and ask Assemblymember Woods and Senator McGuire to encourage that they consider being the author or authors of the language which is going to be developed by the California League of Cities and RCRC to help resolve this CRV issue. And that concludes my CRV report.
Thank you for that report. Any questions from board members for the director on this report? Hearing none, is this something I don't know that we need to throw this out to the public. Somebody clarify that. I don't know.
On the agenda, they had get the chance to comment.
Yeah.
No, but it's a non-action item, and whenever the board is taking action, it is required. So it's the board's discretion.
I'm willing to throw it out if somebody from the public has a comment. I'm willing to accept it. Thank you for the clarification.
I see no hands up at the very least.
Then we will move on to the next item, which is standing report, standing item, executive director's report.
I think it should be board members report.
Oh, I stand corrected. Board members report. Tyler, would you run through a roll call on
that? Bone.
Happy to be here.
Herrera.
Nothing else to report. Thank you.
Castellano.
I did reach out and have a good conversation with Derek Gustafsson from the League of California Cities. So I was happy to see that was, I guess, a couple weeks ago. I was happy to see that he was one of the signers of that letter that we received today. I don't know if I had much to do with it, but I think it's just nice with that CRV issue to keep the conversation going. So I'm glad to see that the league's also involved. That's all I have to report.
Thank you.
Hogan.
Nothing to report, thanks.
Smith. I see him going for the unmute button.
Difficult, yes.
Welcome aboard, by the way.
Thank you. Most of the time.
Do you have anything to report from Ferndale?
No, I don't.
Okay.
And finally, Wilson.
Nothing to report. Okay, that takes us through board reports. I guess that now moves us to the standing director's report.
Yeah. And there's some pretty some pretty big things that have been occurring. So I'm going to give this as a little bit of background, especially for our newest member, but then we also have a couple of members who are still little bit young in their tenure with HWMA. Board members will recall that I sent you just a short email last week informing you of a situation involving our green waste. For background, HWMA had entered into a 10-year green waste processing agreement with Mad River Hardwood Corporation, and the corporation officers are Wes, Teresa, and Nick Green. Mad River Hardwood Corporation is the owner of the property where the business West Green Landscaping in Arcata is co-located. And West Green Landscaping was purchased by Nick Green, the son of West Green, in 2017. I say that because you're going to hear just like some twisting and turnings in this. And so, you know, basically, green waste is accepted at the property for processing and composting by West Green Landscaping. However, HWMA and the cities of Arcata's green waste is processed. You know, we have the agreement with Mad River Hardwoods, and they have an operational agreement with West Green Landscaping to process the material. So our contract is, like I said, with Mad River Hardwoods. HWMA and the city of Arcata was notified last Wednesday, February 3rd, that a dispute arose between West Green Landscaping and Mad River Hardwood representatives, which has now placed our green waste processing services into jeopardy. There have been a series of conversations between members of the Green family, and currently a member is refusing another member access to the site so that our material can get processed. However, West Green Landscaping is continuing to accept cash paying customers to drop off their green waste materials. So we immediately coordinated with Bettendorf and Dry Creek Composting. It is located at the Dry Creek landfill, but they have a full composting operation so that our green waste that is received at HWMA's transfer station, as well as the city of Arcata's green waste, the residential drop-off waste, that will continue to be processed into compost and it won't be landfilled. The cost difference, which is going to be considerable, will be covered through Mad River Hardwoods, reimbursing the authority for our cost. The City of Arcata did issue a press release last Thursday informing their green waste program residents of this temporary change. And HWMA provided notification to the county LEA of the temporary change in material destination. And we received approval for that on Tuesday, February 11th. We receive approximately 200 tons per week of green waste. And certainly we don't have the storage capacity for that volume of material in terms of being able to accumulate it for any long period of time. And there is a very limited ability of walking floor trailers. Traditionally, we put material like the solid waste into a possum belly trailer. There's a tipper, and it's able to, you know, the trailer is removed from the truck, and then they just simply, you know, tip it back and drop it. In this case, they don't have a tipper where the green waste operation is, and so we're having to haul it down in walking floor trailers, and there's not a whole lot of them. We are further exploring the possibility of sending some green waste down to Cold Creek Compost using another transporter if we are able to secure. We're going to do a trial run tomorrow and take a look at what that looks like for turnaround time and cost. The hauling distance is shorter, but unfortunately those trailers are not going to be able to get loaded to the same weight as our regular trailers do. So this is, you know, obviously another one of these very fluid situations. We are all very hopeful that the dispute between the family members can be resolved in a relatively short time frame, but honestly, we're planning for at least 30 to 60 days before we're able to start resuming back to the Arcata site. The issue has nothing to do with our contract in terms of HWMA and our relationship with Matter of Hardwoods or West Green Landscaping. It is simply a dispute between the parties of West Green Landscaping and Matter of Hardwood. And we're essentially the collateral damage, and that's made it really awkward for everybody. I do want to express to the board my deep appreciation and thanks to Bettendorf and to Dry Creek and to Recology. Recology is pulled a couple of walking floor trailers that they have, and they're folding them in so that Bettendorf can use them to haul. And Humboldt Sanitation for their willingness and all of their responsiveness in helping to navigate this really critical matter. I also want to acknowledge our Director of Operations in helping to facilitate temporary solutions to ensure that this material continues to get composted and handled this way, not being landfilled. And honestly, like CRV, it really shows how vulnerable our waste management system is. And it's been a considerable investment in the development of that infrastructure. HWMA was, involved with in the beginning, and it's just currently a really challenging moment. So stay tuned. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. We're doing the best that we're able to do so that we can continue accepting and getting the green waste out appropriately. I'm going to stop there and to see if anybody has any questions specific to the green waste. I do have 2 more items to let you know.
Any board members have questions for?
Have we, and I'm sure you have, what were Steve Morris and Bob Fegus and the people that do have chippers and everything else and grinders, what would, we pay $600,000 a year to Mad River Hardwood.
Correct.
That would be a, and if nothing else, finding an avenue here where we split the weight, so we grind it here so we can actually hit the 50,000 pound volume, because you can't do it in branches. So you could, because otherwise what's going to be 12 trucks, we can take down to 8 trucks if we can fill them up to weight.
Yep.
It's going to take 12, because you're only going to be able to haul about 36,000 pounds if you're not going to grind any of it.
That is correct. And so I was talking, so first off, this happened, last week. So we were immediately, trying to get our fallback plan together. And the parties were actually hopeful that they were going to have it resolved within a week or 2. And based on some of the more recent information, I don't think it's going to be a week or 2. And so Eric and I were talking this afternoon around the possibility of a grinder. We can't have a grinder on our site, so contracting out with somebody. So we'll be taking a look at that one in the next couple of days. I don't know what the availability is of Steve Morris and Rex. I was trying to recall, is it Knight or McKnight that also does grinding services?
Yeah, I don't think he's doing it anymore though.
Okay. If you've got some names of people that are doing grinding locally, that would be really helpful for us.
Well,
the list that I
actually,
have is old.
Grinders are sitting right now because of the, the closing of DG Fairhaven. So all that, all that material there that was being ground. I still think there's a little bit being done down in Frank's neighborhood. And so, I mean, there is still some options to get rid of it, but I just hauling it all the way to Dry Creek. Again, we're hauling our problems into another state. And again, we're talking about containing, a few 100,000 pounds of organic waste, but we're going to drive this stuff 500 miles to another state.
Right.
And it just amazes me sometimes that
well, like I said, that was
a penny.
Yeah, and like I said, that was our emergency sort of response in anticipation that they'd be able to resolve this relatively quickly, and it'll obviously take a little bit of time, and we accumulate material faster than we're able to get it out. So
fully understand, but what I'm saying is, if somebody steps up to do it, then they will probably want to sign a new extended contract. And because it sounds like the contract's already been broken between Mad River and West Green. So because they're not providing the service.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So thank you. If you've got some more information,
'em.
Rex, just shoot me an email. I would really appreciate it. Any other questions on the green waste?
Can
Yeah.
I? I think you've been using Cold Creek compost and Dry Creek landfill. Am I right, kind of interchangeably? Have you checked in with, they're 165 miles south, Cold Creek compost. Did you check in with them to see if they might be an interim?
So we use Metaver Hardwoods. That's who we use. For the interim, we sent it up to Dry Creek, and we're sending our first load tomorrow. One of the things that we've identified, and we're still trying to get information, the cost to Cold Creek is considerably more. Even with that longer, and the load is not as much. So yeah,
make sure that okay.
Yep, we're looking at them as well. Any other questions? Seeing none, the other hot topic is treated wood waste. And board members will remember that treated wood waste, the waiver which allowed incidental material to be disposed of at transfer stations sunsetted on December 31st. So effective January 1st, all treated wood waste that would be coming in from, let's say, residents or small amounts from contractors is required to be handled as a hazardous waste. And that's a designation by the Department of Toxic Substance Control. Obviously, this sent a pretty significant reverberation through the state of California, because there is currently only one location in the state which accepts treated wood waste, and that is in Buttonwillows. And so DTSC, their director has been amazingly responsive to the concerns that have been expressed by all the generators and transfer stations and landfills. And so they have been developing variants. They've got they released today. We participated in a webinar, myself and Eric, that they will be accepting applications for a variance, and that will begin next week to allow certain sectors to accept and dispose of treated wood waste. The variances will be good for only 6-month period. You can reapply if it expires, but the variance, they anticipate the 6-month in anticipation that AB 332, which is an urgency bill, which I forwarded to all of you a while back, and that will allow the disposal of treated wood waste into transfer stations and to landfills. We did support an email of support to Assemblymember Wood and McGuire back on January 28th. I do want to note that there are some clarifying questions that we need to resolve with DTSC before applying for the variance, in order to, as well as ensuring that Dry Creek landfill, which is an out-of-state landfill, is able to secure a variance for disposal. Basically, the state of Oregon recognizes any limitations that the state of California has, so it's not a given that if you could just slide it out the back door and give it to Oregon or give it to Nevada. So we've got a little bit more work to do on that, and we will be able to start taking a look at the information from DTSC around this new variance that they laid out today. One last item, I just want to note, we do have an employee who is retiring, and he's been a material diversion tech, and he's been responsible for our baling operations, and he is retiring after 41 years in the solid waste collection and recycling business. So he's worked in a number of capacities, including city garbage of Eureka. Then he went to work for ACRC, and then with HWMA. And so we certainly all wish him a happy retirement as he's preparing for what life is going to hold next for him. So that concludes my ED report.
Is that Sam?
It is.
One-eyed Sam, I'll be damned. He's been there a long time.
They're a long time.
Any other questions for Executive Director? Seeing none. The next item I think we have is closed session.
Closed session. Mr. Chair, I would ask if you could read the need to go into closed session. We did receive a letter from, a joint letter from Zero Waste Humboldt and the other signatories, and I'm just going to blank on acronyms right now, but EPIC, North Coast Environmental Center, Humboldt 350, and CT, I can't recall the other one. Anyways, the transportation. And then I also have 2 additional letters. So if you would read that, ask for public comment. I asked Nancy if she would read 1 letter, and I'll take on the other 2. And then we can go into closed session.
I want to point out that one representative, Maggie Gaynor, is still here. So I would actually ask for public comment, and Maggie can introduce her letter.
Good suggestion.
Well, then I would ask for public comment. Is that what you want?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do public comment.
I actually, at the very beginning, just to let you know that we've been meeting. We're concerned about SB 1383 and the other kinds of things where HWMA weighs in significant in the community as far as waste reduction and of all types and climate change. Climate change is what is driving SB 1383. And so we decided to jointly write a letter and to encourage that in your selection of Jill's replacement in her retirement, that you not only look for someone as good in government relations for a JPA, but also someone who understands what it's going to take to deal with the magnitude of SB 1383. And there's many different ways to go about it, in pieces or one big chunk. There's just a huge variety, but understands composting and is enthusiastic about SB 1383. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
So we did receive 2 letters, which I'll go ahead and read into the record. And I will note that when I get back into the office, I will scan them so that they're available, and we'll have it onto the website. This letter, the first letter, is from Kathy Chandler Klein of Arcata, and she is addressing the hiring committee. I am writing to encourage you to consider the following as part of your search for a new director for the Waste Authority. The proper disposal of organic waste to comply with state mandates is challenging, although it may not be easy to find ways to disperse edible food and compost organic waste here locally. It should be a high priority to solve these problems locally. Shipping our waste to other areas seems to undercut the purpose of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We hope the new director will be committed to dealing with the waste here, familiar with our community resources and possibilities, and a creative problem solver. The second letter, is submitted by Emily Siegel, and she is a resident of Eureka, and she writes, I am writing to urge you to add a community representative with a background and knowledge about fulfilling the Organic Waste Methane Emissions Reduction Act, so that the new executive director that you hire will be someone who can address this issue effectively. California's SB 1383 requires the reduction of methane by diverting food from the waste stream and recycling organics so they do not end up in the landfill, because landfill methane is a powerful greenhouse gas. SB 1383 is an important tool in addressing climate change. Also, processing this food waste locally into compost will help money spent in our community and support our local food system. HWMA needs an executive director who is knowledgeable about these issues. And those are the three pieces of correspondence that the board received relative to the closed session item that we'll be going into momentarily.
Okay, so these are all public comments relating to the closed session.
That's correct.
Any others any public hands going up that we haven't seen?
I see no hands raised, so I believe that is it.
So how are we going to do this public or this closed session? Do we have to?
If you are not a member of the board, Jill, Nancy, I am going to start kicking you unless you uninvite yourself. And then Jill will be the host and we'll go from there.
So I do want to make a quick comment. And Frank, if you'd like, I can go ahead and read it. We just need to announce the fact that we're going into the closed session and for what purpose. Do you want me to read that?
Yeah, I don't have it to read, I don't think.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and read it so that way we're we're keeping everything straight. So we are going to be going into closed session, and it is the intention of the board of directors to meet in closed session for one item: public employment, executive director, pursuant to Government Code Section 54957. And with that, Tyler is going to begin saying goodnight to each of you. Thank you all for attending.
Yes, I have